An 83-year-old hunter named Matvey Kuzmin guided a whole German ski battalion into the snow near Velikiye Luki. The Germans thought they had bought the one man in the village nobody would call a patriot, a loner who never joined the collective farm. What none of them understood was that the old man had already decided how the night would end. By dawn, the battalion would be caught in the open, and the price the guide had agreed to pay for it, none of them could have imagined. Every piece of this is on the record, from a war correspondent's dispatch to the statue that still stands in the Moscow metro today. In a frozen village called Kurakino, near Velikiye Luki, in the winter of 1942, lives a man the war has mostly stepped around. Matvey Kuzmin is 83 years old, and he's a hunter who has spent his whole long life learning to read these woods. He knows every path, every frozen marsh, every ridge where the snow lies thin over the ice, the way most men know the rooms of their own house. The front runs somewhere out past the black line of the trees, and German troops hold the frozen villages here, while Soviet units claw at the line and try to stop them from pushing any farther west. It's brutal country to fight in, all marsh and timber and drifts that swallow a man to the waist, cut through by a cold that finds every gap in a coat. Kuzmin keeps to himself. He never signed up for the collective farm and never marched under anyone's banner. And to his neighbors, he's about the last man on earth you'd point to and call a Soviet patriot. The village even has a name for him, Biryuk, the lone wolf. He's an old outsider with a gun and a dog, stubborn and solitary. And that reputation is exactly what carries his name to the Germans. Because the Germans have a job that needs a man like that. A ski battalion, troops trained for snow and rough ground, is getting ready to swing wide and hit the Soviet positions up at the Malkino Heights from the flank. And they've run into a wall that no amount of training can climb. The wall is the forest itself. Moving hundreds of men through this country in the dark, on skis, with nobody who truly knows the ground, is a fast way to lose a battalion before a single shot is ever fired. Men wander off in the black timber, and whole columns come apart between the trees. So the officers decide they need a local, someone who can thread the entire force through the woods at night and set it down precisely where they want it. And the payoff for getting it right is real. A clean flanking march means coming down on the Soviet positions from a direction they aren't watching, hitting them in the side instead of the teeth. The whole value of the plan rides on surprise. Trust the wrong man with the route, and the surprise cuts the other way. They look around Kurakino and weigh the faces, and they settle on the safest one they can find. They pick the hunter, the solitary old man who owes the Soviets nothing and looks like he'll happily sell his skis and his silence for a rifle and a sack of flour. In their eyes, he's the obvious bargain choice, and that reading of him will get most of them killed. The Germans bring the old man in and lay out what they want from him. Guide us through the forest, they say, and take us around to the Soviet flank. It isn't really a request, because in the occupied villages that winter, a German order always comes with a rifle standing right behind it, and everyone in Kurakino knows what refusing one costs. Kuzmin doesn't flinch, and he doesn't refuse. Instead, he does the one thing that sets the officers completely at ease. He starts to haggle, treating the whole deadly errand like an ordinary hunting job and naming his price without blinking. By some accounts, he asks for money, flour, kerosene, and a hunting rifle of his own before he'll set a boot in the snow. To the officers, that little flash of greed answers the only question they had about him. A patriot would argue, or go silent and stubborn and make them drag him along at gunpoint. A man calmly haggling over a rifle is just a mercenary, and a mercenary is a thing they know exactly how to use. The old outsider is precisely what they took him for, someone who'll sell his knowledge of these woods to whoever pays the most, and now they're the ones holding the purse. So they relax, and that ease is the mistake that dooms them. The man nodding along in front of the German officer has already worked out how this night is going to end. right down to the ground it ends on, and it has nothing to do with the price he just named. What the battalion believes it's buying is a safe path through the snow. What it's actually buying is the last walk most of these men will ever take. Before the column ever forms up, Kuzmin makes his real move, and he makes it in the one window when nobody is watching him. He sends his grandson, Vasily, some accounts say a son, out into the dark, hours ahead of the Germans, alone across the open snow. Vasily carries a single job, and it's the kind that gets a man shot on sight. He has to reach the Soviet lines at Pershino before the battalion moves out, and put his father's message into the hands of the 31st Separate Cadet Rifle Brigade. The Germans are coming. This is the route they've asked for, and this is the very different place the old man means to bring them instead. Between Kurakino and those lines lie miles of open snow and forest tracks, and every one of them can hold a German patrol. A figure moving alone toward the front, at night, in occupied country, needs no trial and gets none. If anyone stops him anywhere on that road, father and grandson are both finished, and the whole plan bleeds out quietly in the snow before it starts. But Vasily gets through. The warning reaches the brigade, commanded by Colonel Stepan Gorbunov, and the Soviets move fast on what he brings them. They don't simply dig in and brace for a blow. They build a trap of their own out near Malkino, machine guns sighted to sweep the open approach, gunners settling into the freezing dark to wait for a column that still thinks it's the hunter and not the prey. Now there are two plans laid over the very same stretch of forest. The Germans have their flanking attack, mapped and briefed and ready to roll at dawn. The Soviets have a kill zone, sighted and loaded, waiting at the exact spot the German guide has quietly promised to walk his employers into. And the frail old man is the seam where those two plans are stitched together. Picture what that actually asks of him. The trap is set and the guns are laid, but Kuzmin still has to walk straight into the middle of it himself, out front, at the head of the men he's condemning. He has to hold his nerve for hour after hour in the cold and the dark, and never once let a single soldier catch the truth on his face, that the shuffling old guide leading them is the deadliest thing in these woods. The column moves out in the black cold before morning. Kuzmin takes his place at the head of the battalion, skis hissing over the crust behind him, and he leads them in under the trees. He does not take them straight. That is the whole trick, and it's a patient, murderous one. The route he picks loops and doubles back and drifts wide, stretching a march that should run a couple of hours into something far longer and far crueler than any of them signed up for. Every extra mile is on purpose. Kuzmin is spending the battalion's strength the way a hunter spends daylight, carefully and without waste. The column wallows through waist-deep drifts and black thickets behind him, legs and lungs wearing down by the hour. And the soldiers read the cold and the distance as bad luck rather than design. Nobody in that column knows this forest, so nobody can tell an honest shortcut from a slow circle to nowhere, and doubt has nothing to grab onto. Kuzmin's knowledge of the ground is the one thing these soldiers can't check for themselves, and that helpless trust is the blade he holds to their throats the entire way. He times the whole exhausting loop so that he'll set them down at Malkino right at first light, when the ambush can see them clearly and they'll be far too spent to fight their way back out. The column moves in the dark to the rasp of hundreds of tired men breathing, steam rising off their backs into the freezing air, the endless drag and slide of skis over snow. And up front, an old man in felt boots sets a pace these young soldiers can't understand him keeping. He is 83, and he's patiently walking a battalion into the ground. First light comes up grey over the snow, and the old man leads his worn-out column out toward Malkino. Straight onto the open ground the Soviet gunners have already ranged. After a whole night of following one harmless guide, The last thing this battalion expects is that he has walked it onto a killing floor. Then the trap snaps shut. Soviet machine guns open up all at once from their prepared positions, and the fire rips into the Germans while they're strung out and exhausted with nowhere to hide. The 2nd Battalion of the 31st Brigade and the local village defenders hit the column at exactly the point where Kuzmin set it down for them. There is nowhere to run. A spent battalion, caught flat-footed in deep snow, with guns working it from more than one side, comes apart fast. Soviet accounts put the German dead at somewhere around 50 men, with roughly another 20 taken prisoner as the survivors throw their weapons down into the drifts and give up the fight. Somewhere in that chaos, the German officer finally understands what the old man has done to him. The guide he trusted, the cheap mercenary he was so sure he'd bought, has led an entire battalion into a Soviet ambush and stood there at the front while it sprang. In a fury, the officer turns his pistol on Kuzmin and shoots him down where he stands, twice by the accounts that reach us. So the old hunter dies right there on the snow, at the very instant his plan pays off in full. He never fired a single shot at these men. He simply led them, patiently, for one whole night, to the one place he had promised the Soviets he would deliver them. And the doing of it cost him every year he had left. The man they trusted brought them exactly where he said he would. This is the point where a story like Kuzmin's usually dissolves into pure legend, and his does the opposite. A Soviet war correspondent named Boris Polevoy carries the account from the front, close enough to the story that he stands at the old man's funeral, and it runs in the Soviet press as the feat of Matvey Kuzmin. Almost overnight, the whole country is talking about a new Susanin. That name is doing quiet work, and it's worth being honest about it. Ivan Susanin was a Russian peasant who, in the retelling, once led enemy troops to their deaths in a swamp centuries before this war. The comparison is a frame the Soviets lay over Kuzmin, not some neutral fact of that grey morning at Malkino. And nearly every number in this story reaches us through Soviet pens. The accounts name the attackers as mountain troops of a division that German records place 1,000 kilometers to the south that winter. So the unit's true identity is genuinely unknown. One later Soviet veteran's account even shrinks the battalion to a company and the 50 dead to about 24. The shape of the night holds in every version. The arithmetic belongs to the tellers. Polevoy doesn't let the old man fade after the war either. In 1948, he writes a short story about Kuzmin's last day, and that little story works its way into Russian third-grade readers, so whole generations of kids grow up already knowing the name before they know the details. Then comes the strangest part of the record, the long silence that follows. Real recognition takes 23 years to arrive. On the 8th of May 1965, a Soviet decree names Matvey Kuzmin a hero of the Soviet Union, more than 2 decades after he bled out in the snow near a village most people will never find on a map. By his age at death, he becomes the oldest person ever handed that title, listed as 83 in the official record, though his own family always counted him as 86. One monument to that night is still standing, and you can walk right up to it. Down in the Moscow metro, at Partizanskaya station, a bronze old man in a fur coat and felt boots has watched the tunnel since the station opened in 1944, a heavy staff in his hand, cast in metal under a city he never once saw while the war he died in was still being fought. The safest man in the village, the obvious bargain choice. He outlived every soldier who marched behind him that night. For more deep dives into military history, make sure you're subscribed to the channel.